Thanks. In an ideal information environment, many datasets like RISM would facilitate access to related resources using the principles and tools of linked data. Part of the promise of linked data is to establish relations that make it possible to separate data for separate datasets to function together in a meaningful and more productive manner. While the focus of this workshop is on RISM, its sister projects, including RILM, RIPEAM, and REDEEM, or any other number of bibliographic datasets, including library catalogs, online thematic catalogs, and repertory guides, are all appropriate to include in this discussion. In order to achieve the aims of linked data, two essential ingredients include name authorities with unique identifiers and corresponding work authorities with their own unique identifiers. Together with my colleagues, Greg and Jeff, our initial intent was to highlight how RISM could be linked to other information-rich utilities like Wikidata, Discogs, MusicBrainz, IMSLP, and even YouTube. I apologize we didn't quite get there. Consequently, I've revised our title. When evaluating the practices applied to music authority work, there are numerous situations where basic rules are inadequate to address complicated exceptions, and where the application of conflicting or variant solutions has resulted in confusion. These problems are familiar to music catalogers and anyone using RISM for research. Many of these issues have already been examined in other presentations. Some of these problems appear in repertories where pastiche or arrangements are commonplace. Other inconsistencies come from the differing approaches to work authority records found in different national name and work authority files. One of the more pressing obstacles to solving these problems is the fact that there are comparatively few musical works that are given work ID numbers in VIAF and other national authority files. In the context of RISM, it is my understanding that very few RISM records include work identification numbers. In the short time available today, I will highlight examples of a few select problems common to many repertories. I will also take a close look at work authorities published under the auspices of the Library of Congress and show the problems that result when all arrangements of a given work are lumped together with one work identity or assigned one work authority ID. In order to achieve more consistent and leakable work descriptions, one obvious solution is the creation and integration of international work IDs. Currently, the most practical approach might be the creation of work authority records that are subsequently clustered in VIAF. Even as that work is accomplished, we still need to develop tools to link or associate these VIAF work IDs in datasets like RISM. So I will also share some workflows that we have tested and which we feel offer promising prospects. Once these goals are achieved, then the numerous options for building linked data relations, which we originally planned to present, become possible. Given the time constraints, I've chosen just one example of a problematic pastiche arrangement. I will focus on the arrangements and collections of airs composed or arranged by Francesco Petrini. The works by Petrini listed in RISM are limited. Depending upon how you search his name, only about 40 titles are found. About a dozen of these 40 titles are identified as collections of airs, or recueils d'airs connus. The title page for the quatrième recueil actually spells out the larger works from which the airs are derived. In this image, we can see references to the overture of L'Ami de la Maison, an opera comique by Grétry, 5 numbers from Sciaccini's La Colonie, the overture to Gluck's Iphigénie, as well as 6 different airs from various ballets. When we examine the score within, each of these arrangements is clearly identified. In this case, the level of description of sources is exceptional. In most cases, the actual sources are not identified. This type of pastiche represents a dilemma in a Ferber model. If we follow the Vimy model of work identification, this collection of errors can be seen as an expression of multiple different works, including at least 3 operas and multiple ballets. One could, and most catalogers probably would, forego a description of each larger source and simply conclude that this collection constitutes a new work in its own right. Indeed, the one record in RISM referencing this edition offers a minimal description of the work and mentions nothing concerning its sources. Even more disappointing, the BYU catalog record and its equivalent in WorldCat combine the 4e, 5e, and 6e collections of airs into a single record and offer no indication of the contents of its sources or its sources. In other cases where the musical sources are only alluded to generally, the process of identification could require considerable research and investigation. If time permitted, I could review thousands of similar arrangements and pastiches. The practice is certainly not limited to the harp. Many other genres, including ballet music and 19th century French vaudeville, rely on frequent quotation from other related works. In cases like Petrini's Requiem, where works are clearly identified, or in cases where research has revealed the original sources, it would make sense to reference these sources in some way. Ideally, somewhere in the catalog record or bibliographic description, a unique work ID for each music source quoted in the arrangement would be included. It is conceivable that such work IDs could include subfield modifiers to identify the nature of the borrowing as outlined in the ontology proposed by Kevin and Trina yesterday. For harpists, it may not be so important to be able to access additional information about the sources of this work. The purpose for identifying these relationships may have more to do with musicological research. From RISM and other sources, we are well aware that much of the solo repertory of the 18th and the 19th century was based on well-known popular tunes. That is good to know, but it is more important to know which works were quoted most frequently and how widespread that popularity was. Building IDs in RISM is essential to answering these sorts of big data research questions. Improving the level of detail in catalog descriptions is only one necessary step. The next steps relate to inadequate practices in national and international authority files. Library Work Authority records offer various levels of description and analytical detail. All are tied to the composer's name. They also allow for the ability to create separate authority for each edition of a work, following Ferber's Vimy model for works and expressions. But in practice, it is not common to find separate authority records for different editions of music publications, especially in regards to arrangements and selections. A good example of this lack of granularity in library authority records for selections is a record for selections of Vivaldi's Concertos. Following the link at the top of this slide, you will see close to 60 unrelated publications pointing to the same authority. A few examples are shown below. Different expressions and manifestations of completely unrelated works are all grouped together under one ID. I think it is safe to state that work authority IDs like this example are common, and this approach is not helpful to achieving the goals of linked data. And yes, Vivaldi for Dummies is actually on the list. It is a simple thing to state that all catalog records need greater detail in describing the sources of derivative works. One can also make casual criticism of the way authority records for selections and arrangements have been constructed to date. Making these improvements to RISM and other music data sets will require a lot of hard work. There's nothing simple about it. That said, we propose that the best solution to these problems is the creation of comprehensive, unique work IDs clustered in VIAF, or, as we've been learning at this conference, other solutions to the basic idea of creating unique work IDs. These internationally established work IDs can then be referenced in each RISM record, and again, all kinds of bibliographic utilities, including library catalogs, thematic catalogs, and repertory guides. Unfortunately, I do not have hard statistical data on how many musical works have corresponding work IDs in VIAF. Our preliminary investigation, using a RISM subset of about 4,700 works that feature the harp, suggests that the ratio is very low. Based on our sample, fewer than 14 to 15% of RISM's works have VIAF work IDs. I do not know how feasible it is to hope that libraries will collectively prioritize this challenge and improve the ratio. I believe there is similar work to be done in the realm of name authority, which already receives higher priority among libraries. It has been a few years since it was last updated, but in a name authority file that I maintain for my database of primary sources for opera and ballet, only about 10% of the names of composers and librettists have VIAF records. Perhaps the solution will be some kind of partnership with scholars working in specialized topics to contribute their expertise to the creation of more authority records for both names and works. I recall and emphasize one of my earlier remarks that the creation of unique identifiers for both names and works is essential to the realization of meaningful linked data. As these unique identifiers become more comprehensive and universally applied, there will remain the difficult task of importing or pairing these work IDs into RISM and other music datasets. In his presentation yesterday, Stefan suggested a workflow which, if I understood correctly, would be a laborious manual process of identifying one work at a time. With the little time that's left, I would like to present a workflow we have tested that at least partially automates the process of matching VIAF work IDs to specific records in RISM. Here in a nutshell is the basic plan and procedure. We begin with the premise that there is a body of work IDs in VIAF that correspond to specific items in RISM. We wish that body of work IDs in VIAF were more comprehensive, but it is not a bad idea to at least begin testing what is there and build a connection to RISM. We cannot know what is there and what we need to create work IDs for before we know what already exists. We make our first level of correspondence between RISM and VIAF using the RISM name authority IDs, which have been imported into VIAF. Fortunately, because RISM has entered that information in VIAF, it makes it easy to begin a correlation process. Once we can establish the relationship based on the composer ID, we then extract from VIAF all of the works associated with that composer. As I am sure you are all aware, each name or composer cluster in VIAF includes a list of associated works. Not all of those works listed have VIAF work IDs, but a small percentage do. Once we've exported the VIAF list of works based on the connections made with the name authority IDs, we have experimented with the process of matching work IDs with RISM holdings. In the first test, my colleague Greg Reeve created a Python script that compares the two files and looks for similarities using opus numbers and text strings from the 240 and 245 fields. The result of that test appears to be very successful. In the next step, my colleague Greg Reeve plans to write a reconciliation service for Openrefine based on the Python scripts, which he continues to perfect. Openrefine is an online software program used to clean up large, dirty data sets. By dirty, I mean full of inconsistencies or information in variant forms that should be uniform and standardized. Here are some of the screenshots that will give you an idea of how Openrefine works, if you are not already familiar with it. One of the most basic functions is the ability to cluster information in any given category and display options where and how that information should be standardized. The process works using drop-down menus. Hope you can see that clearly enough. Here's a sample of the results of a cluster. The software identifies information that appears to be similar and gives the user the possibility to select the preferred version and standardize the rest to match that version. Another option uses what Openrefine calls a service. A service consists of custom programming to link your own data set with outside sources like Wikipedia and VIAF, Wikidata and VIAF. You begin that process by creating a new column to store the information you will pull from the other outside source. Once that column has been created, you can call on the service to compare your data set, and where matches are found, it will populate the new column with the information that the service is programmed to provide. The architecture of Openrefine is such that third parties can write code for specialized services. That is what my colleague Greg is in the process of preparing. In summary, and looking for ways forward, we plan to continue testing and refining reconciliation with VIAF for work IDs. It is probably not very practical at this point to consider a mass reconciliation of all 1.4 million RISM records, but there may be ways forward focusing on specialized interests of limited repertories. While at this conference, I've learned that it is possible to import, that an import mechanism for VIAF work IDs could be incorporated into MuseCat. I hope that idea will be pursued and that everyone involved in MuseCat input will consider linking VIAF work IDs whenever possible. At the beginning of my presentation, I mentioned that the issues related to work authority we are addressing in relation to RISM can also be applied to a wide variety of music bibliography and research projects. There is always hope that certain basic methods and descriptive requirements can be agreed upon. To me, it seems that one of the most basic and essential ideas is the establishment and incorporation of comprehensive name and work IDs, work authority IDs. I believe RISM is well positioned to help promote this basic goal through collaboration with libraries, scholars, and users. Thank you for listening, and here's a link where you can get all the code that my colleague Greg has been developing.